Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Beyond the Gatekeepers. I am Bishop Vanessa M. Brown, your host and moderator for this evening. And I welcome you to talk about current events through a theological and justice-informed lens. Tonight, we have a great author with us here on tonight, and we're so excited about all of you being here. I want my Facebook Live audience, the Instagram audience, the YouTube audience, everywhere we are, LinkedIn. I want you all to start letting us know where you are from, where you're watching from. We need to know your name, your city, and your state so that we can shout you out. We are excited about having our guests here on tonight. We are looking for a very exciting show on this particular subject matter. And so while we're here tonight, I see people coming in from every place. Make sure that you're sharing on all social media platforms where we can be found. We're on Facebook, on Bishop Flunder's page, of course, on Beyond the Gatekeepers page. We are on Instagram on Beyond the Gatekeepers and YouTube on Beyond the Gatekeepers, as well as X on Beyond the Gatekeepers. We're on LinkedIn as well. We want you to make sure that you're sharing for this particular conversation. And we have Elder Boaz Parker here with us tonight. We're glad to hear from Philly. Chuck Hunt from Monroe, Louisiana. Chella Belcher from Connecticut. Welcome. Bert Bowman from Dallas, Texas. Welcome. Lay Pastor Ronnie Jordan from Rancho Cucamonga, California. Jeanette Spees from Durham, North Carolina. Rhonda Height from St. Louis, Missouri. Karen Coleman from Boston, Massachusetts. Sharon Axe from Los Angeles on YouTube. Pastor Siegfried Benton is from Temple Hills, Maryland, here on tonight. James Tony, also from Los Angeles, California. Pastor Erica Smith Maynard, here from York, Pennsylvania. Darlene Pittman Connor is with us tonight from Queens, New York. Dinah Chapman, thank you for being here. Dublin, California. I know that more and more people will show up on tonight, and so we are excited to have everybody in the space, in the place. Make sure that we're sharing again on all social media platforms. I'm going to bring Bishop Flunder out with me right now. And she is our presiding prelate of the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries, senior pastor of City of Refuge United Church of Christ. And of course, I'm so grateful that she helps to facilitate, moderate, and all of the wonderful things. Good evening, Bishop Flunder.
How you doing?
I am doing. How are you?
That was in my best Carlton Pearson voice. He would say, "How you doing? How your mama doing?"
He would.
He would.
Every week. He sure would.
Every week.
And we certainly miss his presence.
Yes, we do.
With us. But at least his physical presence, his spirit is still with us, right?
Yes, indeed.
And Bishop, I decided that we were going to bring somebody else along. So I'm going to introduce Bishop Sonia E. Williams to the people tonight.
Right.
Bishop Sonia E. Williams is the senior pastor of Rim Fellowship United Church of Christ. Bishop Williams, come on and greet everybody tonight. We are so glad to have you with us tonight.
Greetings, everyone, and thank you for this invitation to be a part of this conversation. I'm looking forward to it. God bless you both.
Yeah, we're gonna banter a little bit amongst the three of us before we bring our guests on. We're gonna talk about what's happening with this election. Do y'all see what's happening?
Foolery and buffoonery.
What you call it?
Foolery and buffoonery.
Foolery and buffoonery. And listen, I think we got what, like,
and Chicago.
Yeah, like we got what, like 8 more months or so, right, before we elect a president. And it seems that Donald Trump is leading 6 states. 6 states. I just read about it. I just saw it. And it came from, I respect this brother. He's got a book out, and that we're going to call him in to be a part of our conversation soon. Actually, I've already invited him. I'm just waiting for a response back. But the bottom line is that, Bishop Flunder, I know that the polls are the polls, right? They got polls out. There's 7 2024 swing states, y'all. And the hot topic issue is immigration. Believe it or not, it's a big issue, and it seems to be affecting the president's re-election. Joe Biden, and so I'm seeing that there's a survey that was taken, and it shows that Joseph Biden is 3 to 10 points behind the Republican frontrunner in November's race. And those states are Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And so we're going to have to do something about this.
Most definitely. And immigration is the only grab that they really have. As far as the far right, they're using immigration as a smokescreen. But the truth of the matter is they don't have a leg to stand on any other subject other than immigration. So as long as the Democrats come through strong and lift up all of the other factors that really will make a decision in how we move forward in this country, we may have a chance. But immigration is the only leg they have to really stand on.
And I'm glad to hear that tonight.
Yeah.
Well, and they also said they had a red wave in the last election.
Well,
there was no red wave.
and it didn't work. And the thing that I have learned about this whole political thing is that this whole surety of how things are going to turn out, I don't think it has worked well consistently. The surety is problematic.
Right.
Even I would go so far as to say even the folks that stormed the Capitol were sure that they were going to be acquitted and they were not going to have to go to jail. And when the time came to forgive and pardon, the then president of the United States did not help them at all.
Right.
It's sometimes it's smoke and mirrors. I do believe, however, that we have a major problem at the borders, just like we have a major problem in our cities. This whole, in terms of population problems, population issues, which is an oxymoron. And I think at some point we have to talk about the fact that we're talking about not having enough room for the people that both live here in the United States, not having enough jobs for the people that live here in the United States, and simultaneously, everybody that gets pregnant should have a baby. And when I put all that together, we have a very serious and problematic reality to call a thing what it is. We're overpopulated, underpaid. We are without the ability to care for the already living children.
My goodness.
And trying to, in some way, suggest that every pregnancy should end in birth. So obvious, and we don't know who to get in bed with in terms of our international comrades. We just don't really know which one of these wars are we in agreement with.
We got a lot going on.
It's a very confusing time, Bishop Vanessa.
It is.
Somewhere our faith has to suggest, however, that our God is still able to do exceeding abundantly above all we can ask or think, and that God somehow will get the last word. But I certainly agree with your question. It's a bunch of dumb, stupid stuff going on all at the same time.
And we need to be strategizing, and I know we're going to get to it. We're going to stick a pin in it right now. I am wanting to shout out Esley Edwards from Chicago, Lady Joyce Radden here, Las Vegas, Deacon Val Moore, New York City, Miko Mo on YouTube, Medina, Georgia, Colette Walker, thank you for being here, Anthony Bailey, Sacramento, Pastor Ann Jefferson, California, Oakland, California, Deacon Marlene McLaurin from Baltimore, Unity Fellowship Church of Columbia, Elliot Morris from Chicago, Cheryl Robinson Moore from St. Louis. Oh, I see the people just coming in. Sebastian Hassel, welcome. Maria Harris from Denver, Colorado. I am so glad. Roberto G. Robinson, welcome. Puerto Rico. Thank you. Caro Brown, God bless you. Welcome. RJ Love, love you so much. God bless you. Deacon Ryan is in the room. Cincinnati, God bless you. RJ Love representing the Bronx. And so we got a great author with us tonight, y'all. And he's waiting in the wings. Derek Grant, God bless you. He is Dr. O.G. Ogbar, professor of history and founding director of the Center for the Study of Popular Music, University of Connecticut. He has written a book called America's Black Capital: How African Americans Remade Atlanta in the Shadow of the Confederacy. Dr. Ogbar, please come and greet our audiences on tonight.
Thank you very much for having me, Bishop Brown. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Greetings, good evening, Bishop Flunder and Bishop Williams. Happy to be with Beyond the Gatekeepers. Thanks for inviting me.
We are happy to have you here. We want to dig down into your book tonight, Dr. Jeffrey, if we can. One of the things that I feel about the book is that it displays and it chronicles the Black excellence in the city of Atlanta. I want to first ask you the question that I ask all the authors that come on. Why did you write this book?
Yeah, so I began by looking at Atlanta in our current time. So I went to Morehouse College my freshman year in 1987. I was impressed by the visibility of African Americans in the city, like in every strata. And I was raised in LA, born in Chicago, and all three cities at the time had Black mayors. But Atlanta had a very different presence of African Americans in municipal structure. And from the airport, the executive of the airport was Black, the head executive. You saw Black people, the majority of the police force, fire department, public school system. And it looked different than Los Angeles. It looked different than Chicago. It looked different than really any city I'd ever seen. And I hadn't seen many cities at 18 years old, but there was something special about Atlanta, even in the late 1980s. And the thing that also sort of impressed me was simultaneously, there were these markers throughout the city that celebrated the Confederacy, right? You had these streets named after terrorists. You had schools named after people who committed treason against the United States. You had monuments dedicated to enslavers. And so you had whole neighborhoods that were dedicated to terrorists, enslavers, traitors, and white supremacists. And I found that contrast fascinating. Stone Mountain is one of the biggest attractions to in the South after Orlando. And millions of people came to look at this monument that's larger than what we see Mount Rushmore in North Dakota. And all those larger than Mount Rushmore, they're dedicated not to presidents of the United States, but to people who aim to destroy the United States and maintain slavery. Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, and Jefferson Davis. So I found the contrast fascinating. And ultimately, I ended up writing a book to explore how a city that was once completely dedicated to the perseverance of slavery and the subjugation of Black people became the putative capital of Black America, with the highest concentration of Black-owned businesses, highest concentration of Black millionaires. African Americans are overrepresented in the municipal structure. The largest airport, the busiest airport in the world is Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport in Atlanta. It's been under executive Black leadership since the 1980s, and it's won awards over a dozen years for its efficiency. And so it's a quite remarkable story of the improbable rise of something like Atlanta. We don't expect Atlanta to come from what would have been the capital of the Confederacy. So that story really comes up in this book.
Thank you for leading me to that. And I'm going to get Bishop Flunder and Bishop Sonia in. Atlanta was one of the most hardened cities of white nationalism anywhere, and it was central to the outcome of the Civil War. And certainly it was a very inhospitable place for freedom. So that was a struggle. Tell us a little bit about that portion of time in Atlanta.
So yes, I actually, in the process of writing this book, I learned a lot for every stage of the city's history. And what I found most striking was in the period leading up to the Civil War, the antebellum period. Atlanta was it was a small city. So in 1860, a year before the Civil War began, Atlanta was the 100th largest city of the top 100 largest cities. So it was the bottom, right, of the top 100 cities. There were 4 cities in Georgia that were larger than Atlanta. Atlanta was a very small city. And the number of people who were in Atlanta who were enslaved, it was actually relatively small because the city itself was small, but the Black people who did live there were every organization that Black people could create were outlawed. Black people could not form any social organization. Churches were outlawed. Schools are outlawed. It was illegal to teach a Black person how to read. If someone happened to learn how to read somehow, it was illegal to allow that person to have a job where they actually could write. It was illegal for Black people to have friends come and visit unless you got certification and support from the city government. If you had someone that came in from out of town and that person did not register with authorities within 5 days, that person could be arrested and enslaved. Black people could not, in fact, you could not only have firearms or buy alcohol or sell alcohol, you could not dress. Like Black people in Atlanta and Black people all around the country, for that matter, all around the world, take great pride in how they dress. And one of the things that people in the 19th century, they passed a law that a Black person not only could not have a cane, which I understand a cane might be used as self-defense, so they didn't allow that, but you cannot have a cape on. And so in the 19th century, when you see people who are fly, like with Count Dracula or somebody with a nice cape, you can wear a cape or you can be arrested, right? If you're a Black person. So it was a very inhospitable place. Yet even in that space, you start to see a severe erosion of those legal codified ways to control Black people during the Civil War. And there was a Black man named Robert Webster who was technically enslaved, but his enslaver was a diplomat for the Confederacy. And he ended up officially becoming very, very wealthy as civil society collapsed around him during the Civil War. He became one of the most powerful and wealthy people in the city of Atlanta during the Civil War. He engaged in trade and underground market for meat when people were literally starving, for vegetables, for fruits, and currency. And he traded in United States dollars against Confederate dollars, and he made large sums of money. He was making thousands of dollars a day. And this dude, at the end of the war, the mayor of Atlanta, when they surrendered to General Sherman, the Union Army, the mayor brought 8 people out, including this enslaved man named Robert Webster, because Robert Webster had become such a powerful man. And this is a guy who was technically enslaved. So it was really kind of interesting that the human spirit for innovation, the human spirit, particularly the Black spirit for achievement, for excellence, for innovation, for all these things could not be repressed. And you see that in Robert Webster's character. But that becomes a sort of story that you see throughout the book. No matter what sorts of laws you put in place, whatever customs you put in place, whatever sorts of things you put in place to control the aspirations of the human spirit, you find Black people push against that for generations. And it's, again, improbable, but you have Robert Webster's for multiple generations.
Bishop, thank you so much, Dr. Jeffrey. Bishop Williams, you live in Georgia. Do you still see some of the vestiges of things that Dr. Jeffrey has spoken about?
Most definitely, yes. I was thinking as you were speaking about the Confederate flags and different things like that. Imagine going to a school named after a prominent Black figure, but yet seeing the huge Confederate flag hanging out in front as a constant reminder, and also having statues and monuments on the schoolyard of these leaders, that these military persons and of the Confederacy. And it does send very mixed messages. And yes, a lot of that still exists, but the spirit, as you spoke of, the spirit of African-American people, we're just going to rise beyond it. I mean, they've tried to do everything to keep us down, all sorts of disparities, but there's just something in the spirit and in the heart and in the culture of Atlanta that we just refuse to be kept back and kept down. We keep rising from the ashes. From the time of Reconstruction, when Sherman burned it completely down, we began to rise. Black people began to vote during that time. We had a situation that was almost similar to Greenwood, where Black people started making money, and their dollars were circulating in the community several times before they left the community. And unfortunately, people came in and burned it down. But we rose up again with Sweet Auburn. And so, yes, it's just something in the spirit. I believe that when there's a dense population of people that are oppressed, there's something that happens in the transcendent power of God. And they give, like Detroit had singers, it's just something in the water in that area. Georgia just has this thing for equality and the cradle of the civil rights movement. And we're going to continue to be that and do that and
I
rise
love
above the
that.
oppression. Yeah.
I
Mhm.
love that. Thank you so much, Bishop Sonia. I wanted to bring Bishop Flunder in, but I want to just tag on to what you said about General Sherman. Uh, he was burning down the city, and Governor Brown was pleading for government support. He said, "We must hold Atlanta. It is to the Confederacy almost as important as the heart is to the human body." Did y'all
Mhm.
hear me? He Go ahead, Jeff, Dr. Jeffrey.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know this, but and obviously I'm a historian, and it's my job to know this kind of stuff. But Abraham Lincoln, who remains one of the most celebrated U.S. presidents in history, streets named after him, cities and towns and schools, and Abraham Lincoln, as celebrated as he is one of the greatest presidents in the United States, and someone who was particularly revered by African Americans and for generations revered by African Americans. Uh, it looked like he was not going to win re-election when he was running in 1864. And in 1864, it looked like he was so weak that his own inner cabinet thought that they should have a veritable coup d'etat to find someone who could run against him. Frederick Douglass, who was the most prominent African American who had gotten to know Abraham Lincoln, felt that Abraham Lincoln was too weak and would lose as well. He was seen by some as being a poor commander in chief. He did not have enough victories against the traitors who had risen up against the United States and committed uh, uh, gross treasons at the expense of hundreds of thousands of Americans. And they wanted the war to come to an end. There were two generals who were running against him. One was a Democrat who wanted to have peace with the Confederacy, and if you have Gallup polls back then, he would have been leading in the polls, right? This guy and this General McClellan, George McClellan. McClellan was a Democrat who wanted to establish peace with the Confederacy, unite the United States, and preserve slavery in the Constitution, right? So he was like, "We'll have peace, we'll unite, and we'll preserve slavery," and that's that guy. Another general named John Fremont wanted to break the back of the Confederacy, destroy slavery, and destroy the rebels, and be done with it, right? And he thought Lincoln was too weak-kneed to go hard against the Confederates, and they weren't having the victories. So it turns out that about 2 days in late August, Abraham Lincoln confided in one of his cabinet members that if I don't have a big victory, I'm doomed in November, right? I'm going to lose in November. Turns out about 4 days later, September 3rd, 1864, after Sherman had laid waste to Atlanta, and Sherman said, "I will leave Atlanta a desolation." He said, "Whether we get in or not anytime soon, it's going to be used up by the time we're through with it." And they had one of the first modern sieges in U.S. in the global history, just like the kind of stuff you would see in World War II, right, with Stalingrad. And it turns out they got a telegram from Atlanta, said, "Atlanta is ours," and fairly won. And those famous words were shared all across the United States. Newspapers, New York, Chicago, Philadelphia, they ran in big bold letters, "Atlanta is ours," and fairly won. Abraham Lincoln ended up having a turn of events. People praised him. They said he was a wonderful commander in chief. Atlanta was the centerpiece for the war machinations for the Confederacy. They made all these materials. They couldn't do that any longer. Those factories that made all the bullets, made all the guns, did all those things for the war, that cut off a huge supply for Atlanta, transformed the war. They had successive victories for the Union Army, and Lincoln won by a landslide in November. Right, it was transformative. So Atlanta was central to the outcome of the Civil War, and really an outcome to slavery, and outcome to freedom, and outcome to the survival of democracy in the United States. And so we often sort of overlook just how pivotal that one victory was to the fate of the country itself.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jeffrey. Bishop Flunder, the political and social justice landscape of Atlanta. You can see the rising of Atlanta through the political and social justice landscape of Atlanta in the midst of white nationalism. Do you think that this upcoming election will help Blacks and African Americans continue to fight back against the nationalism that we know is embedded?
Well, there are several similarities, I think, in that experience and the experience that we're having right now. I think first of all, the intention in politics is always to make you think this is exactly what's going to happen, whatever it is, if you understand what I'm saying. So, and for us right now, that has a lot to do, us as in people of African descent. The intention is to sort of make us think it's going to be useless for us to go to the polls. It's going to be useless for us to vote for what we believe, because the end of this is already set. There is nothing that can be done to stop the wave that is the former president. There's no political, no judge, there's no Black folks, there's no women, there's no gay folks. Nobody's going to be able to stop him. The people have harnessed God to the front of this and said that he can't be defeated because he's, though raggedy he may be, he is Ezekiel, he is Daniel, he is the prophet that God has sent. We took him up to the 32nd floor of his own building and prayed for him and saved him and brought him back down. And he turned his Bible upside down, but he still had his Bible. Let's just put it that way. So this is history repeating itself. And I see it that way because I think that Lincoln and Biden have a sameness. I think that there were people that thought that Lincoln could not and would not, and there was no way. In the same ways that people, they thought him weak. We don't see him weak in the historical context. But to your point, Brother Jeffrey, he was seen that way during the time that he could not break through. Let's put it that way. But you know, politics, it doesn't work that way. It doesn't. And here we are back at it again. This is not the issue of the end of slavery, right? It is, first of all, important that we recognize slavery by another name is still slavery, right? And that reality does exist for us. It's not the end of it. It is today's slavery, which of course requires that we diminish and vilify so that other people can have supremacy. We're there again. That vein is really deep in the United States. The folks came here stealing. They came here stealing land, stealing people. Then they brought people here and still needed to be supremacists. And these are the sons and daughters and offspring of the folks who came here running away from their countries and hit the ground stealing and seeking to diminish those that people who were native to this land, and then to enslave not just Black people, but on the West Coast, we're talking about Asian people. We're talking about people of Hispanic descent to build and to make this nation. So when in your bloodline, it's a long answer to a short question, but in your bloodline, you are fixed on being a supremacist. It just repeats itself over and over and over again. And here we are. And I would love to see the victory come again out of Atlanta. That would just bless my whole soul. I really do believe that Atlanta is going to play again a substantial part to deal with the underbelly of white supremacy, which is seething again. It stopped for a minute. It stopped for a while, Bishop Vanessa, because it didn't look like it was going to happen, that they were going to, but they got Trump. And now all of your 15 AR-15s that you have in your basement, you can go get them out, get them ready, polish them up, because we have Trump. I think there's a huge surprise coming, a huge surprise coming. A Lincoln type.
I believe it.
surprise coming.
And I'll be looking for it.
Mhm.
Listen, good people of goodwill. This is Beyond the Gatekeepers. I'm Bishop Vanessa Brown. You're here with Bishop Flunder and Bishop Sonia. And we have a great guest tonight, Dr. Jeffrey Ogbar. He is the writer, author of his new book, America's Black Capital: How African Americans Remade Atlanta in the Shadow of the Confederacy. And so, of course, tonight we're going to give away a book. There's going to be a free book giveaway. We want to make sure that you type the hashtag Beyond the Gatekeepers, hashtag Beyond the Gatekeepers with an S, so that you can win that book tonight. We also want you to purchase this book because this is good history. This is, a matter of fact, great history. He's a great historian, and I think that people need to know this history to see the rise of Black people who were oppressed, come on, struck down in every kind of way, city burned down, but people of goodwill, Black people, helped to rebuild this particular city. And so we want you to purchase that book, and it's going to be in the chats, and all the chats you'll see the ways in which you can purchase the book on tonight. Dr. Ogbar, do you think the improbable rise of Atlanta's Black leadership class was a direct consequence of the city's Confederate legacies?
Yeah, there's a really fascinating sort of counterintuitive process for Atlanta, in that because in the aftermath of the Civil War and the establishment of Reconstruction comes to an end. African Americans who did have the right to vote, Black men had the right to vote, they were stripped of their right to vote through all sorts of machinations. And one of the things that we often think of is like uh, voter suppression takes many different forms. So the 15th Amendment to the Constitution said you cannot deny someone the right to vote based on race or anything as long as they're male. So the state of Georgia has come up with creative ways to prevent people from voting, and they decided to use things like, of course, we know literacy tests and poll taxes and other things. But they really settled on the most effective way was to create what they call the white primary. And we hear a lot about the grandfather clause and all that, but the most effective tool was a white primary, which said that the the state will have its political parties have a primary just like we do right now, but the political parties are private, right? And so yeah, all the men have to vote in November in the general election, but for the primary, this is a private organization, so the private Democratic Party will only allow white guys to participate. And because they had eliminated the Republican Party, where that was the party of Lincoln, that was the party of President Grant, who worked very hard for African American rights. It was a party of Frederick Douglass. It was a party that brought us the 13th Amendment that ended slavery, 14th Amendment that gave citizenship rights to all people born in the country, and 15th Amendment, which gave all men the right to vote. And it was the same party that spearheaded the destruction of the Ku Klux Klan. So what they did was remove the Republican Party from effective operation in the South, and then they established a series of repressive laws as a consequence. So finally, to go to the issue with school, was that in the city of Atlanta, there were no public high schools available for African Americans. And the highest grade that African Americans could go to was the 8th grade. And then they eliminated the 8th grade because they wanted to save money to build white schools. So then the highest grade African Americans could go to was the 7th grade. So what African Americans did, with the help of Black churches like the AME and Friendship Baptist Church in Atlanta, and white missionaries, they created Black schools: Morris Brown, Morehouse College, Spelman, Atlanta University, the Gamma Theological Seminary, and Clark University, which became Clark College later. These schools provided. Oh, I'm sorry.
There's a something
Static.
a static that's coming from you.
I'm sorry.
You have more than one.
All right, there's a fan on my computer that makes noise sometimes. It's down now, right? You still hear it?
It
No.
sounds like two church fans hitting each other.
Okay. Yeah.
We want you to be able to go out and come back in. That's what
Yeah.
Pastor Sue is asking for you.
Yeah.
Just
Okay.
go
Should I
out and
go
come
and
back in.
in? Okay.
Yeah.
Should I log off and come back in?
Yes, yes, sir.
Okay,
Yes,
I'll do
that's
that.
very important information that you're sharing. We want you
All
to.
right, thanks a lot. Sorry for that. I apologize for the technical
Okay.
It's
issues.
okay.
All right, I'll be back.
Bishop Flunder, he
Yes.
was hitting on some good stuff around the schools, and I want to make sure that he repeats that stuff
Yes.
because we want to say some things about the schools. But I can ask Bishop Sonia this
Yes.
particular question, and so I think this question for you, Bishop Sonia,
Mhm.
Black Mayor of the city of Atlanta, first Black Mayor, Maynard Jackson.
Yes, yes, yes.
Maynard Jackson became a model of public policy for the cities, for the states, for the federal government, and he had an aggressive affirmative action plan or program known as the Atlanta Plan.
Mhm.
Tell us about, do you know about the Atlanta Plan?
Yes, of course, I was just a kid, as not to date myself, but yes, he had a plan where it really gave opportunities to Black businessmen in Atlanta, where they were receiving more contracts and doing a lot of the infrastructure changes. In the healthcare system, it afforded a lot of African Americans to be employed in our healthcare system, especially Grady and Emory healthcare system were big proponents of that. And yeah, Mayor Maynard was the visionary behind causing Atlanta to be international city. That was his vision. That was a platform he ran on, and because of his run and his reign as mayor, Atlanta completely changed in the way that the world perceived it, and a lot of other cities modeled themselves after Atlanta. But yes, he was a big proponent of affirmative action, and it certainly gave a lot of African Americans opportunities, and it advanced the African American middle class and upper middle class in Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Bishop. And Dr. Jeffrey, I want you to go back to you were talking about Spelman and
Yes.
Morehouse and Clark, Atlanta, all of those schools. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, I'm sorry. How's it sound now? Is it better?
Excellent.
Okay, fantastic. So just briefly, because African Americans did not have access to public high schools, these private universities and colleges provided secondary education for African Americans in the city of Atlanta. So Black families, even poor families, would score together their resources. Sometimes churches would support people. They would send their daughters, their sons to these schools. And as a consequence, unlike Detroit, unlike Chicago, unlike Los Angeles or New York, you actually have you have the highest concentration of Black institutions for higher learning in the United States of America. You have all these universities and colleges, and they become incubators for Black leadership and opportunities in ways that you don't find in other cities. So there's an irony there. One is that you have this incredibly rigid, hostile city that refuses to provide public resources for Black folk. What they do is create institutions to meet those gaps. But those institutions advance the Black community in ways that the white nationalists never intended. They didn't expect one of the most dignified, successful intellectuals of the 20th century, that got a PhD from Harvard, spoke many languages, was internationally acclaimed, Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, to be an activist in Atlanta. He was a professor at Atlanta University. He hosted a whole bunch of conferences. Those conferences were consequential. He had a conference entirely on Black business that led to the National Negro Business League. He was the one in Atlanta who spearheaded the Niagara Movement, which led to the NAACP, the most consequential civil rights organization in United States history. So in Atlanta, you actually have Black people who were barred from restaurants, barred from hotels, barred from amusement parks. And these alumni of these schools end up creating those institutions for, by, and about Black people. The first Black amusement park in the United States happens in Atlanta, Joyland Park, in the early 1920s. The only daily Black newspaper in the United States of America in the 1930s was the Atlanta Daily World. You had more Black people in Chicago, more Black people in New York City, but the New Amsterdam News or Chicago Defender or the California Eagle in Los Angeles, the Pittsburgh Courier, the Baltimore Afro-American, they were not dailies. It was Atlanta's newspaper that was a daily. And in Atlanta, the editor was a man named Scott. Scott actually created the first newspaper or Black media empire. He ended up buying newspapers across the South and had a massive newspaper chain centered in Atlanta. And again, he was an alumnus of Morehouse College. And so, like Maynard Jackson would be, like Dr. King would be, like Benjamin Elijah Mays, president of Morehouse College. And so you have these people who are alumni who, like Du Bois, taught at Atlanta University, or people who graduated from these schools. And these people became significant figures in shaping not just local institutions and policies, but as we'll see, as you mentioned earlier, Bishop Brown, the Atlanta Plan is exported around the country and ultimately around the world. South Africa, after the end of apartheid, President Mandela wanted to open up opportunities for Black people in South Africa, much in the way that Maynard Jackson tried to do so in Atlanta. And believe it or not, his successor, President Mbeki, reached out to a consultant from Atlanta who became the only American consultant for South Africa in expanding opportunities for Black South Africans who are not white, other South Africans of color as well. And so there's a lot to be said about the model of Atlanta and those institutions. The intention was not by the white nationalists for any of this to happen, but because Black people had to rely on themselves, you have this extraordinary success.
Dr. Jeffrey, thank you. Bishop Sonia, you said something. You wrote something. I want you to say it.
So as he was speaking about the colleges and universities here in Atlanta, it was actually a student from Morehouse. His name slips me now, but he launched the civil rights movement here in Atlanta. There were some students visiting from South Carolina that went to have lunch at a Woolworth, famous. I don't know if there's Woolworth everywhere, but here in Atlanta, that was like a famous drugstore. And they sat at a lunch counter there, and they were, put out, treated badly. And one of the students from Morehouse went and gathered the students from all of the universities, and it launched the civil rights movements. They did 4 years of protests and sit-ins and different things of that nature before Dr. King actually became one of the prominent figures here in Atlanta.
Funny that you mentioned Woolworth. And I'm gonna let you go, Bishop. We had Woolworth in Harlem as well.
Oh wow! Okay.
Mm-hmm. Bishop.
Yeah, I was going to say that Bishop Williams, I think the person you may be referring to is Lonnie King. And Lonnie King was certainly, he may have been the most prominent of the students who were part of the Atlanta student movement, it's called. And yeah, they were inspired. You're right on the money. I mean, they were inspired by the sit-ins that started February 1st, actually tomorrow, February 1st, 1960 in North Carolina. You had students at HBCU right there in North Carolina. They went over, they sat in at the Woolworths at the lunch counter. Those 4 students launched what we now see as a sit-in movement and became the founders of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And it was headquartered in Atlanta. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference, King's organization, headquartered in Atlanta. So Atlanta became a centerpiece. I think Bishop Brown, you may have said it earlier, that it became a sort of headquarters to some extent of the civil rights movement. And there's a lot to be said about how inhospitable Atlanta even was during the civil rights movement, although it has, we know how some people say, oh, he's a really good person, he just got a bad rap. You know how people say, oh, he's misunderstood, he's a good person, he just got a bad rap. Atlanta's the opposite. Atlanta was a bad person with a good rap. Atlanta was a bad city with a good rap. And so during the civil rights movement, people are surprised when you tell them this stuff, because Atlanta had a mayor named William Hartsfield, a white guy, who in 1959, he said, look across the South, look at Little Rock 9 in Arkansas. He said, you have these, we have these images, all 4 of us, we have the images of those 9 little children trying to integrate Central High in Arkansas in 1957. One of those children, she gets separated from the 8 because the 8 ended up going to school. She didn't have a phone. She shows up by herself. She's surrounded by hatred, surrounded by barbarians, vile, hate-filled, veins popping out their necks, spitting at her, calling all sorts of vulgarities, mean-spirited, terrible images that embarrass the city of Little Rock to some extent. I'm sure a lot of people are proud of what they saw, right? And then we have the images of Ruby Bridges in New Orleans, a little girl. She wants to get an education. The schools, they don't want her to have an education. Federal marshals have to escort this little child to school because they're filthy, horrible monsters who want to murder a child who wants to get an education. And she has to have federal marshals bring her in. Hartsfield was like, well, let's go back to famous images of Rosa Parks being arrested or Dr. King being arrested. You could Google the images of them with their mugshots, right? For the Montgomery bus boycott. and his house was bombed in Montgomery. We have the images of Birmingham, Alabama, and Bull Connor, and fire hoses, and then the 16th Street Baptist Church. Those four girls that became angels, right? So we have these images. Atlanta doesn't have those images, and so William Hartsfield said, we don't have those images because Atlanta is a city too busy to hate, and that stuck. It became this moniker, an aspirational moniker, and people said Atlanta's a city too busy to hate. But we look at the numbers, and this surprises people, y'all. Atlanta integrated its buses over a year after Montgomery, Alabama. So when we see those images, we don't we assume, and I'll keep going. So they integrated the buses after Montgomery. They had more terrorist bombings than Birmingham, Alabama had, which had been called Bombingham because there were so many bombings. There was a part of Birmingham they called Dynamite Hill because there were so many bombings. Yet Atlanta had more terrorist bombings than Birmingham. When it came to school integration, the reason we don't have Ruby Bridges, the reason we don't have a Little Rock 9 is that Atlanta made no effort to integrate its schools. Of all the southern schools, of all the southern states, Atlanta was second to the bottom in integrating its schools by number and by proportion. So Atlanta was recalcitrant, it was hostile, it was obstinate. It refused to make the gestures that other cities did. So when people saw the absence of a Little Ruby Bridges, it didn't mean the presence of justice. When they saw the absence of a Little Rock 9, it didn't mean the presence of a sympathetic city administration that thought all students should have equal education. And so the presence of these images for other cities, a lot of times people have assumed the rhetoric to be the case. And so Dr. King, as you said, Bishop Williams, Dr. King came back to Atlanta after Montgomery. He was at Dexter at the Baptist Church in Montgomery. After the boycott, his dad said, you come back here, you can be involved in the movement, you become co-pastor. He did that. Atlanta became a very important part to the struggle. But there's another irony here, and this is what I talk about in the book. And this is, again, a very surprising irony. The National NAACP and the National Urban League both looked at their Atlanta chapters and said, why aren't you pushing harder for integration? And they didn't understand why the Atlanta leadership was very tepid when it came to demanding integration. And ultimately, Lonnie King, whom you made reference to earlier, Lonnie King in 1973, I'll stop right there and I'll open for questions. The entire chapter of the NAACP got suspended by the national chapter because Atlanta's chapter was not pushing harder for integration. And I can explain that story later, but I'll stop. So Atlanta was a very tricky spot, even during the civil rights movement.
Thank you, Dr. Jeffrey. Bishop Flunder?
I think the question that really comes up for me when I hear this, because there is definitely not only the children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren of folks that are Atlanta born and raised. That's not the only movement toward Atlanta. There are people that are going to Atlanta from all over the United States. I'm born and raised in California. And when we got to the point where people were able to outsource their staff and they didn't have to be in Silicon Valley, one of the places that people really have landed is in Atlanta. In Atlanta and in parts of Texas. This really did leave, okay? Especially in the suburb cities, where some folks have said that things are much more given to being racist in the suburb cities. But the heart of what it is that I'm trying to say is that there's a huge move still to Atlanta. And these are not people who are the offspring of folks who have and carry this kind of, I might say, painful history. The bloodline of people who knew oppression. They seem to be moving to Atlanta because there's a certain aura of freedom and access to freedom. I know these people. If you understand, I'm a Californian, so I know these people. I'm curious to know what your thoughts are, perhaps Bishop Sonia's thoughts also, in terms of living in this experience. What is it that is the call, the clarion call, as it relates to Atlanta?
So here in Atlanta, you rarely meet a native Atlantan, first and foremost. I'm not a native Atlantan, but I've been here long enough to claim it and call it home. I've been here 42 years of my 55 years. Um, but there is a sense of freedom here. And there's a saying that we have where we don't draw lines, we draw circles. We don't draw lines of division, but circles of inclusion. And I think that is the epicenter of the welcome here, is that we're very inclusive. Once we've moved beyond the civil rights movement and past that era, even though we still have a lot of work to do, um, there's just a era of acceptance here and diversity and inclusion. And it's not so much of a melting pot where everyone's trying to blend in and be the same thing, but a true respect and celebration of diversity. And I think that's what makes the difference. And again, that statement that was made earlier by Dr. Ogbar, did I pronounce that right? I got it right, Dr. Ogbar, that Atlanta's a city that's too busy to hate. That was the slogan that they were flashing, but that wasn't true behind the scenes. We had to literally fight to establish ourselves here. And it's just like for other African Americans who've migrated from other areas. Once you get here and get established, you call all your kin folks and tell them to come on. And so that's how that happened. And we began to build subcultures here in Atlanta. So, yeah. Did that answer your question, Bishop?
And yes, this has just if you allow me, Bishop Vanessa, just a little bit in the question. I've asked myself, how can we use the diaspora going into Atlanta, but how can we use the growth of Black folks? To your point, Dr. Jeffrey, how can we use the growth and presence of Black folks as an example in some way to help us in this time? Back to Bishop Vanessa's original premise that we've got elections coming up that are cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. Let's just be really, really clear about what our situation is. How can we use the kind of gatherings that happen, the kind of presence, the kind of history that we have heard about this city and the way that it has impacted the lives of Black people, but the way that Black people have impacted the city? What can we learn from what it is that both is its history and its present reality that can assist us in this crazy situations that we're dealing with politically in this time? What would you recommend that we pull from the history and from the presence to speak to our people who are listening to us tonight about what is our what's next going to be?
So I heard someone say that Charles Blow, who interestingly enough, New York Times writer, a journalist, very prominent. He has a documentary on African Americans returning to the South. He left New York City. He now is between New York City and Atlanta and lives mostly in Atlanta. He talks about he actually addressed this question. He says, what does it mean for us to return to the South in mass and then exercise political power and change the political landscape? And so if you look at the election in 2020, when you have a state that has been deeply conservative and has been red for years, when Stacey Abrams, who was an alumna of Spelman College in Atlanta, organized an unprecedented voter registration campaign and got hundreds of thousands of people registered to vote throughout Georgia in the Atlanta metro area. And these people came out in droves, and they had the biggest upset that we've seen in recent history in the electoral landscape. And Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff became two Democratic senators from the state and the first Black senator from Georgia ever, right? And what is fascinating also about this process is that it turned out that the metro area of Atlanta now, because so many people have migrated, Black people have migrated to Atlanta, of all the metros in the United States, only New York City has a larger number of African Americans. You know, used to have Cook County and Chicago, the Chicago metro area, Atlanta metro area, Philadelphia, all these places have more Black people than you had in the metro area in Atlanta at one point. But Atlanta now, because More Black folks have migrated to Atlanta in the last 30 years than any other city in the country. And then people are leaving Chicago, Detroit, and LA. The numbers have just expanded. And the exercise of political power was manifested in 2020. It was also manifested in 22 when Raphael Warnock ran for election and got a full 6-year term in the Senate. And so what the 2024 election will come down to in the turnout in Georgia, as well as other places, is really if they're going to be successful, like in 2016, suppressing the Black vote. And so we know throughout the history of Georgia that people have worked assiduously to prevent Black people from voting. They use all sorts of measures, right? You obviously, you had the Klan, you had terrorist organizations, you had poll taxes, literacy tests, you had all these different things. But I think now one of the most effective tools to prevent people from voting is what you said, Bishop Flunder, is convince them that their vote doesn't matter. Convince them that their selection of a candidate is between what Malcolm said, a fox and a wolf, that both of them are out to get you and you shouldn't vote for either one. That literally there are people who are telling Black folks that you exercise your political power by not voting. They were trying to, and it's a Jedi mind trick, right? But I tell people, like, if your vote didn't matter, the people who have been oppressing Black folks for hundreds of years wouldn't have been murdering, killing, spending millions of man hours coming up with tricky ways to prevent your great-great-granddaddy, your great-great-grandmama, your aunties, your uncles. They would have been going through all this, blowing up churches, buying sticks of dynamite. They would have been going through all this stuff with attack dogs. They could have let y'all vote. They could have let Black folks vote in 1900 if they felt like the vote didn't matter. They could have let Black folks vote in 1619 the minute they came off the slave ship if votes didn't matter, right? But they did not, because they understood the power of the vote. They understood what someone like Maynard Jackson might do. They understand what it means to have people in the Supreme Court who could decide yes to affirmative action or no. Yes to women have the right to choose or no. Yes to marriage or no. They understand that. They understand what it means to have access to millions of dollars in federal contracts or no, right? And so this idea that somehow your vote doesn't matter or that there's no difference belies the facts before us, right? And we know what the facts say. We know what the historical record says, and we cannot fall for the okie doke. We can't be bamboozled. We can't be hoodwinked. And there are a lot of people out there who are working overtime, and some of these are what I call super woke Negroes who themselves have been convinced that they're super woke by not participating in the political process, right? By sitting at home and watching TV. And the thing is that, it's a profound, I would argue, I hate to say it, this will sound very judgmental, but it's a profound, and I'll say this nice, it is an unfamiliarity with the political process to insist that Black people disengage from it. Whether you like the candidates, they don't have to be ideal. I suspect there are a whole bunch of evangelical Christians who believe in the fidelity of marriage, who will hold their nose and vote for Trump nonetheless. They know that he was having raw dog intercourse with porn stars, but they don't care. They know that he lies and cheats, but they will hold their nose and do it. They don't expect perfection and ideological purity. On our side, however, they'll be like, well, Biden had lunch with a racist dude 50 years ago. I ain't gonna vote for him. And so people create a really high bar when it comes to folks on our side, and then we end up suffering. And Charles Blow at the end of the day said we need to vote defensively, right? And we need to decide one of these two people will be in office, which one's going to give me more, which one's going to really conspire against me, right? One of those people will be in office, right? And so it's your decision. So I think Atlanta becomes very important. I think right now people are working overtime to convince people throughout Georgia and all these other swing states, particularly our community, not to vote. They did this in 2016. Bipartisan congressional hearings on Russian meddling found that the Russian meddling affair, they spent more time directing their targeting to the African American community than any other demographic in the United States, because they understood how important the African Americans were to the turnout of the 2016 elections.
Bishop Sonia, you worked in these elections. You've been involved and engaged in getting people out to vote. We know something of your work, and it has been significant in Atlanta. What would you say? What is your thought about this?
So I think our biggest challenge, I put it in the chat, our biggest challenge is that after Biden won the election, they began to come up with different strategies to suppress the vote of African Americans. They have done all the redistricting and the gerrymandering and changing the lines to where there's not necessarily a majority African American vote in certain areas. So I think that's going to be our biggest challenge. Is one thing that leader Stacey Abrams was able to accomplish is she had a lot of grassroots efforts that she was able to call together and get them on the same plane. It's going to take us to do that again. And also, I think I added in the chat too, one thing that Atlanta has historically been successful at is our civil rights leaders have been able to really touch the hearts of some people who have been most privileged by oppression and discrimination. They've been able to really get in and have the conversations, the table talk. And so we don't need to look at the larger scales. We need to make sure that we're doing grassroots efforts. We're starting the conversations in our home and having the right conversations with our children and in our school system and doing the table talk and starting on the ground level. Because if we do anything other than that House Bill 202 and what was it, SB 202, those laws with they're trying to do away with the souls to the poll. They're trying to limit the absentee ballot boxes. They've passed it. And so we're going to have to make sure that we're doing a lot of grassroots efforts to really conquer this bigger giant. It's almost like David and Goliath. And we've seen that it can be done and it will be done. Places like Clayton County, Fulton County, all of the greater metro Atlanta area, they had a lot of grassroots efforts that really, really were successful. And I think that's the direction we're going to have to go again. And again, have those necessary conversations with people who have most benefited and privileged from oppression to help them to understand that if you say you love me, if you say that you love God, then you don't vote for people who would do something to harm me or harm anyone. Those type of conversations at the baseline level. As you always say, do no harm. Simplistic and baseline, conversations. I think that's what it's going to take. We're going to have to do those same things that we did with Stacey Abrams. And yes, she was able to galvanize and she was, got hundreds of people registered, thousands of people registered to vote that had no interest in voting. And again, the greatest weapon of voter suppression is to send that message that your vote does not count and to create a frenzy of voter depression. They've already started purging hundreds of people from the registers. And that creates this low morale and this voter depression where these young people, especially the Gen, I think Gen Alpha is now of age to vote. They're turning 18, and Gen Zers, they suffer the most from voter depression, from the mixed messages of their vote just doesn't matter. Yeah. So I think that's what we're going to have to do again, is really just start at the grassroots.
Thank you, Bishop Sonia. Yeah, we got to do this again. We got to, whatever it is that we have to do, we're going to have to do it. I want to encourage everyone to please get this book. Please purchase the book. It's in the chat how you can do it. I know you can do it through Amazon or wherever books are sold. I also want to encourage you to be a part of the free book giveaway. Make sure you put hashtag Beyond the Gatekeepers down so that you can win you a copy of the book tonight. And then I want to ask people if they have questions, but I know we're growing close to time. It needs to be exactly about the subject of this book. But the other thing I wanted to say was I can't continue to have this conversation without talking about the good music, the good food, and the film industry that's burgeoning in Atlanta, that's blowing up. Tyler Perry got a whole acres and acres of property doing making films and television shows, and we need to be able to talk about that. Dr. Jeffrey, you have something to say about that?
Yeah, it's a very exciting topic, and it really goes back to I don't know who first mentioned Mayor Maynard Jackson, but whoever mentioned him first, Maynard Jackson, it can be all traced to him in many ways. So Atlanta, this is hard for us now because we think of Atlanta, and all of us, we know Atlanta the way it's been for the last 50 years or so as a really black city. But when people thought of Atlanta back when Maynard Jackson was first elected, in terms of pop culture, the two main things were Gone with the Wind, which was set in Atlanta. It was the biggest, even to this day, it's the biggest grossing box office film adjusted for inflation in U.S. history, right? So centered in Atlanta, it celebrates the Confederacy, celebration of slavery and all that. Then you have this movie called Song of the South. They got like dancing Negroes and like, happy magical Negroes and stuff like that. And so then you have these Confederate monuments and all that kind of stuff. So when Maynard Jackson came in, he created something called the Bureau of Cultural Affairs. And keep in mind, this is in the early 1970s. This is the Black Power movement is coming around. And African Americans during the Black Power movement assert not just the beauty of Black people, but the fullness of Black humanity, right? And the expression of us in art, in literature, plays. We start to have films. We have, of course, spoken word and music of different sorts. And so the city of Atlanta then supports local artists and other artists to do work. And it's not just Black people, but he clearly wants to open up the expression of cultural work beyond the white community and beyond hagiographic celebrations of slavery. And so what you have is support for musicians. And we all know Glass Knight and the Pips, right? But you have a whole bunch of people that come out in the 1970s. Then by the 1980s, there are all these other people that come out of Atlanta. And of course, hip hop becomes big, everything from Criss Cross and ultimately in the 1990s with Outkast and Dungeon Family. Then you go all the way up to the 2000s. We, of course, got Sierra, we got Usher. And then we get like Migos, we got Future. We get a whole bunch of people that come out of Young Jeezy, people that come out of Atlanta. But Atlanta for R&B and hip hop and other genres of music, we have Black-owned labels and a concentration of Black-owned labels throughout Atlanta. And I talk about this in the book. But it actually contributes over $1 billion to the local industry. And we're talking about, again, African-American control. And then when it comes to film, this is another interesting point about Atlanta being a veritable capital for Black America. New York and Los Angeles have the two largest destinations for film and TV in the United States. Atlanta is third. And the office that controls this in Atlanta is run by two Black women, right? And so what's interesting is that Atlanta has not just the busiest airport on earth run by Black folks. We have the third largest film industry managed by the municipal representation by Black people. We have a police department, fire department, school system where the teachers are over 75% Black. LA and Atlanta, you can't claim that in these other places, in other cities outside of Atlanta. And so music itself and film, and then of course we have Tyler Perry. One of the largest studios in the country is Tyler Perry Studios, and then of course is in Atlanta. That last thing I'll say about this is that when I talk about the shadow of the Confederacy, and I say that these things that happen in the shadow of the Confederacy, the book really looks at the arc of Atlanta's history from the mid 19th century all the way up. And I talk about how the Confederacy shaped Atlanta in so many ways, and how people were achieving so much in the shadow of the Confederacy. But when they made Morehouse College, it turned out that when they were making the oldest building on campus, Graves Hall, that they actually found Confederate skulls that had been buried there. Spelman College, when they established Spelman College, it was a former battle site for the Civil War as well. And Fort McPherson, where his Tyler Perry Studios are, that actually is a former fort that was established by the United States government after the Civil War. And General McPherson was actually the highest ranked general on the Union side to die in the war. And that was actually named for that guy from the Atlanta campaign. So all the sort of achievements that Black folks have made in the city of Atlanta have literally been on the ground of former Confederates, which is poetic irony at its best. They never expected. I'll say this. I keep saying it's the last thing. This is the last thing I gotta say. It's the last thing for real. Spelman College in 2024. If you've been following the news, it just got this big endowment, a gifted endowment of $100 million. That school established in 1881 for young girls, often children of enslaved people. That school now is before the $100 million gift. Its per capita endowment is richer than over 90% of colleges and universities in the United States. It's not just the richest HBCU in a per capita. There's only like 2,100 students there, right? Howard has about 11,000 or so. When you look at this school, Spelman is per capita wealthier than Georgetown, than Tulane, than the University of Southern California. And this is a school that has been controlled and run by Black women for a generation, and it caters to Black women who do extraordinary work once they graduate. And so, again, it was on a Civil War battlefield where these women have carved out this niche for Black excellence. So, yeah, the book I try to chart all of it as much as I can, including film and TV and education and churches, too. They come up in the book, too.
You did a fantastic job on that. Go ahead, Bishop.
I just think that I wanted to say to again to Bishop Sonia, I think we should make this required reading, uh, and not just of our folks that live in Georgia, but I think that
All around,
all
everywhere.
to really see if we can spark ourselves
Yes.
and move away from this this tendency that has been lifted up a few times in this conversation, where we the malaise,
Mm-hmm.
this feeling disconnected from power.
Mhm.
It is our time,
Yes, it
and
is.
we are going to have to take the power that has been
Yes.
given to us, and it helps us to take a look at our future and see what our people did and how our people did what they did, so that we can be extremely present
Mhm.
in
Yeah.
Bishop Vanessa's concern, this coming election,
Yes.
extremely present. And I hope
This
all,
book is a roadmap, Bishop Flunder. It's a
yes,
roadmap. It's a way
Yeah.
to help us to
yes,
re-energize us, to lift us up and make us more vibrant, and let us know that if they could do it then, it can be done now. And not just Atlanta, but in other states all across the country where Black people are, we can do this. We can do it. We have the power, we have the ability, we have the strength. And listen, we have the power of our ancestors with us to make this happen.
yes, and amen. I'm feeling real Pentecostal right in here. Yeah, yes, and
I,
amen. I
I want to
support.
say thank you so much, Dr. Jeffrey. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Such a powerful book. Um, shout out to Morehouse, to Dr. Lawrence Carter, Quincy Reinhardt. That's
Right.
right. I know these people. We know them. Shout out to them as well. It was Quincy who turned me on to your book, and so I am just excited and so glad. I say to everybody, listen, if you want to win the book, you must type hashtag Beyond the Gatekeepers. We're giving a book giveaway. If you want to purchase the book, and not if you want to, you order. You ought to purchase this book for your children and your children's children, so they can know the history of their people, of our people, and what our people can do in the shadow of Confederacy, in the shadow, not, and we're not in the shadow of nationalism, we in it, right? But in the shadow of Confederacy. So we really want to appreciate you for that. I see people that are our friends and family, Bishop Flunder, who are here with us. Bishop-elect Kevin Taylor is here with us tonight, and Reverend Naomi Washington Lee Parp has joined us tonight. So many good people. We're grateful for your presence. Livonia Buck, thank you for entering in, and all of those who've been a part of the conversation. All right, I want to fast forward, want to let us know that we want to do some advertisement. We want to make sure we talk about it, but we are very thankful for you, Dr. Jeffrey. Stay with us. We're going to give away your book. Everybody stay with us. We're going to go to advertisement now.
From the blues to hip-hop, African Americans have driven sonic innovation for more than a century. While styles have changed, there's one sound that's remained constant, a source of strength and courage, comfort and wisdom. Gospel.
That's a little bit of gospel.
Gospel music is soul. Gospel music is R&B. Gospel music is funk. It's hip-hop. Gospel music is the full spectrum in terms of its sound of Black music and beyond.
Mahalia Jackson, what was special about her voice?
She believed every word she was singing, and she wanted you to believe it.
Preachers have style, right? Gospel singers have style, right?
Black style in music and preaching is similar because it allows Black people to believe that they can survive a bit longer. My mother had gone to New Bethel Baptist Church.
Is God still stirring your nest?
Theo Franklin would preach, and then Aretha would sing. Oh my God, if you ain't got the Spirit, then you dead.
The sermon becomes the song. The song becomes the sermon.
God, we ask that you would reinvigorate somebody.
It's almost as if there's a soundtrack in a church setting.
Amen, brother. That was beautiful.
For generations, gospel music and preaching have formed the bedrock of the Black religious experience.
The sound still connects people. The sound still gathers people.
These astonishing art forms, carrying an enduring tradition, continue to evolve.
Do you think there will always be gospel music 100 years from now?
I don't see how we can thrive without gospel music.
That's right.
I say it's going to always be there forever.
Listen, as we tell the story of how a people learned to sing the Lord's song in a strange land. This is the powerful story of gospel.
Well, thank you so very much for that presentation. And we are all excited about the coming realities of the story of gospel music, Black gospel music, and extending that reality to the combination between Black preaching and Black gospel music. I encourage everyone to look out for the incoming and soon coming Henry Louis Gates and PBS talking about the Black church, Black gospel music, and Black preaching. We want to encourage you, those of you who have listened to this broadcast for quite some time, you know that we are expanding and we're seeking to expand even more. Support the broadcast by sending a donation. And you can do it via Cash App at $TFAM Annual, TFAM ANNUAL, or PayPal, www.paypal.me/TFAM Justice. Let's support this broadcast as it continues to grow and reach deeper into our community and all communities who seek to hear a word from the now God. God bless you is my prayer.
Thank you so much, Bishop Flunder. And so everybody, I'm making sure that you type in hashtag Beyond the Gatekeepers. That's hashtag Beyond the Gatekeepers so that you can win your copy of this great book, America's Black Capital, How African Americans Remade Atlanta in the Shadow of the Confederacy, written by Dr. Jeffrey. And we're so excited for you all tonight. And so Pastor Sue, drum roll, please. Our winner tonight is Sean Jenkins. Congratulations, Sean. Do us a favor and make sure you put your full name and address inside of our Beyond the Gatekeepers direct message, and we will make sure that information gets to Dr. Jeffrey. Thank you all so much for watching. I want to let you all know that on next week, I want you all to make an effort to try to watch this film, 1946, The Mistranslation That Shifted a Culture. 1946, The Mistranslation That Shifted a Culture. I promise you that it is a wonderful movie. We're going to have the director on as well as some of the people who are in that particular movie on next week. Make sure that you go to purchase the book. Thank you so much. God bless you and have a good evening.